Hello, everyone, and welcome back to A Wild Approach. In this episode, we're going to talk about the garden in winter and tips to help you stay content in the wintertime, even though there's not as much going on in the garden. But there's still something going on in the garden if you garden for wildlife. I guarantee it. I guarantee you're at least going to see some birds. And you're going to see the snow if you're in a place that gets snow. Look at this. This is a tiny bit of snow versus quite a bit of snow. You can see the difference in the layers of snow and how thick it is. So I wanted to talk about this because wintertime can be a dark, depressing time for a lot of people, but there's also some beauty to wintertime. There's the structural aspect of trees when they've lost their leaves, and there's the snow if you get it in your area. Now, I can understand it can be difficult if you don't get snow at all, or if you get very little snow. I could understand it being a little bit harder for you because you don't get to enjoy that particular season, but I'm sure in your area there are some positives to go along with winter. Because maybe if you don't get snow at all, maybe you get a lot more sun than we get. You know, maybe it's a pretty decent temperature where you are in the wintertime. So I think there might be some give and take here. So it really depends on where you live. But in my area, we don't get a lot of snow. So in this video, you're going to see the snow that we did get in 2020. That was about 6 inches of snow. And I live in East Tennessee, so 6 inches of snow was amazing. And even though this was like the hardest time of my life, which I don't really want to get into in this video right now, when I saw that 6 inches of snow, I was like, yeah, this is the worst time of my life ever, but look at that snow. We never get 6 inches of snow here. At least not very often. I think the last time we got a lot of snow was the blizzard of 93. I mean, yeah, we get snow almost every year, but it's usually like 1 inch to 3 inches maybe. So 6 inches of snow, that's half of a foot, you know, for us that's a lot. So I was like, we're going to play in the snow. So we made snowmen and snow women, and we threw snowballs at each other, and it was so quiet. I just remember how quiet it was and just how peaceful that quiet was and how that felt. And just seeing the snow on all of the trees and shrubs, it just looked like something out of a fairy tale or out of a Christmas movie. And it was just really cool to see all that snow just sitting on all those branches and kind of like looked like the trees were melting. I mean, you can see in this footage, some of the trees and shrubs just look like they're melting, and it just looks so cool. Well, here's the snow lady we made made it look like she had a dress and used pine needles as decoration. And then here, you can see the 6 inches thickness of the snow cover. So what I want to talk about is the garden in winter is a little bit of a difficult topic sometimes because there's not nearly as much to do and you're cold and maybe you don't want to go out there. But if you're like me and you like snow, then when it snows, you know, you can look out and you can see the beauty of maybe just the snowflakes themselves falling, even if they don't lay and even if they don't accumulate. It's still beautiful, right? It's still something to look at. And then when it does lay, it lays over top of your plants and creates that other texture and that other layer to the garden. So, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinions when it comes to wildlife gardening, you should not do any, or at least not much, cleanup in the fall. And the reason for this is if you leave your stems and you leave everything standing rather than cutting everything back, and you leave your leaves where they lay and all of this, that is habitat for wildlife. The leaves, sometimes a leaf isn't even just a leaf. Sometimes that leaf is curled up and is protecting a cocoon or a chrysalis, and sometimes there's a moth in there that you don't even know exists. Like, there's a video online that you can go find of a Luna moth coming out of a leaf because they camouflage their cocoons in these leaves. And I understand some people can't leave the entire thickness of leaves on their lawn. Maybe they're a lawn person. I'm not, but maybe they like their grass and maybe they don't want to kill it. I get that. You could rake your leaves to your flower beds and, just make sure it's a flower bed where it can handle that thickness of leaves, or just spread them out so they're not as thick. There's lots of options, but I definitely recommend you do not completely get rid of your leaves. Like, don't bag them up and take them to the dump or something. That's probably the worst thing you can do, because then you're potentially killing who knows how many moths and butterflies. And we're already low on specific species of butterflies and moths, so you really don't want to do that if you are here on the Wild Approach channel. I'm assuming if you're on this channel that you are interested in wildlife and you're interested in gardening for wildlife. So that is something to keep in mind. And I was shocked when I saw a Luna moth come out of a leaf. I was like, what? Because it looks just like a little curled up leaf in fall. And like, it's just, it doesn't look like anything lives in there. It just looks like a dead leaf. But no, something alive was living in there. So just keep that in mind when it comes to your leaves. Now, leaves are great to use as mulch. I kind of alluded to that a minute ago. You can use them in your flower beds. You can use them under your shrubs. You can use them above your perennials. And basically what I've done in years past, and kind of how I started my garden, is I started my garden really based off of leaf litter. So I would kind of like ask family and friends, like, do you want to get rid of your leaves? And then I would rake their leaves for them, or they would even rake them, or, mulch them up or something, which that was before I knew that you shouldn't mulch your leaves up. And I would take those leaves, those bags of leaves, or they would bring them to me, depending on the situation, and then I would dump them on my flower beds, because mulch is expensive. Have you seen how expensive mulch is lately? Bagged mulch or otherwise? Even if you have a load of mulch delivered to your house in a big dump truck, it's still expensive, because even though you're getting a better deal than you are with bagged mulch, you've got to get more of it, to really get the deal. But then you're paying a lot because you're getting a lot of mulch. You know what I mean? So no matter how you cut it, buying mulch is expensive. And I've done it. I've done that. I've brought soil in, I've brought mulch in, I've brought compost in, but I've done that with the dump truck method. I've done that with bags. But I've also done the leaf thing because, early on when you first start your garden, depending on your budget, you might find that it costs just too much money to cover all of the new spaces that you have, especially if you're trying to start from basically scratch. If you are starting from a viewpoint of, well, all I have is grass, all I have is a lawn, and I want to change that to a garden. When you go from basically nothing to a garden, it is a little bit more of a challenge. So using those leaves can help a ton. And so a thing that I did to start my garden, just to give you a quick overview, I have other videos about this that go way more in depth, but to give you a quick overview, I basically started my new garden beds by putting down cardboard, compost, mulch, layers of these things, and then to keep weeds down, I would put leaves on top of all of that as my actual, budget-friendly mulch. So usually it would start out with cardboard and then compost and then leaves. That was kind of like my early rendition of how I would do my layers. And what was great about this method is in the springtime, I could get a jump on the weeds because those leaves were suppressing the weeds pretty well into the early part of spring. But in order to let other things, my actual plants come up and to plant my seeds and everything, I did have to move the leaves aside in the spring to plant seeds and to allow for some things to come up through that, right? But then you find that in early summer, your weeds are going crazy because you've moved your mulch aside, right? So it is a little tricky in the beginning, but once you get going, it becomes easier as you go. Because the more plants you plant, the denser you plant, everything needs to be as close together as possible without hurting the health of your plants. So, and the reason for that is the closer together your native plants are, the less these non-native invasives can just like jump in and like come out of nowhere, right? Like it's harder for them to seed in or to germinate because you've already got your plants there in that spot. But Mother Nature, she abhors a vacuum, so if you have too much empty space between your plants, you're going to get weeds over and over and over and over and over again. So your best bet is to short term use mulch, whether it's leaves or, you know, whatever mulch you can get your hands on. But long term, it's better if you use green mulch. And by green mulch, I mean living plants placed close together. So we're talking a ground cover layer underneath your perennials, and then your perennials underneath your shrubs, and your shrubs underneath your trees. You want to focus on layering. So, with that being said, I have lots of videos on those things. If you want to dive deeper into those topics specifically, go into my channel, look at my playlists, look at my videos, and you will find tips and tricks for starting a garden from scratch and starting new beds and all that. But this video is focused on winter gardening. Now, since I'm in East Tennessee, a lot of December is just wet, rainy, and dreary. Like, at least this year it has been. The year of 2022. Now, the footage I showed you earlier of us playing in the 6 inches of snow, that was 2020. That was kind of rare. Definitely rare. We almost never get that amount of snow, especially in December. We normally get snow in like January, February around here, sometimes early March, but I think February is like the golden age of snow for us now. So that gives you an idea of what we get here. And again, we don't usually get more than like 4 inches of snow. That's like usually the top amount that we get here. But like I said, in the blizzard of 93, we got 3 feet of snow. 3 feet of snow. I remember my mom, she wouldn't let me play in the snow that day because I was probably 3 feet tall. I don't know. I was short, so she had to carry me above this thick layer of snow. And I just remember our power was out and we were like eating Pop-Tarts on the front porch. And then like, we were all bundled up, and then we were taken into the truck to go to my grandmother's house because that was a safe haven for our family back in the day when there was some kind of bad weather situation. And because they had power, I think. So they lived far enough away that they weren't on the same like power line as us. They were pretty far away, so driving from our house with no power and very little insulation because we lived in like a little trailer, a little single wide trailer at the time, going from not really having a lot of insulation. I mean, we were sitting on the front porch eating our breakfast because there was no point in being in the house. I mean, we weren't going to be any warmer as the power was out. So then we were taken to our grandmother's house, and that was always our favorite thing ever, was to go to grandma's house and like get to be there. Like, I remember sometimes we would be actually sad and depressed and upset and cry if we had to leave. Because you always eventually had to leave grandma's house and go home, right? Well, anyway, so that's a little blizzard side note. But let's talk about loving your garden in the winter. Because you're not always going to get snow. Sometimes it's going to be just a wet, rainy season, depending on where you are, and that's what I'm dealing with right now. But look at the trees. Look at the structure of the trees. Enjoy the shapes of them. You can't always see the shapes of them that well when they have their leaves. And yeah, most of us prefer the foliage, and we prefer the lushness of summer or spring. Late spring, usually here. Early spring is usually pretty sparse here. But, you know, there's something to be said about the structural and architectural forms of trees when they don't have their leaves. So that's something to think about. In my opinion, when you have a native garden, there's always something to do, and there's no need to fall into the winter blues. I know that's easier said than done, though, especially if you have, I think it's called seasonal affective disorder. That affects people, and I'm sorry if you have to deal with that, but I'm hoping this video can give you some little tiny, tiny spark of inspiration for winter. Because I think if we loved winter just a little bit more, and we appreciated winter just a little bit more, it might help that situation. But of course, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But let's go over some tips. Number 1, keep as many seed heads up as possible. Seed heads are food for birds, okay? Seed heads are Mother Nature's bird feeders, okay? Technically, you don't really need to even have any bird feeders in your garden at all. I mean, it's good to have, but they can be problematic, and we can talk about that in another video if you want. But the great thing about leaving your seed heads up for the whole entire winter into early spring is because they're a great food source for birds, and the stems of certain plants are great houses for bees. So little bitty mason bees and stem nesting bees, they need hollow or semi-hollow stems that they can actually live inside of for the winter. So please remember, keep your seed heads up for winter. Now, of course, this doesn't count the parts of the seed heads that you save for yourself. Let's say you want to plant more frostweed next year. Obviously, you're going to want to collect some of those seeds. That's totally fine. Just try not to collect too much of your seeds. Like, try to let as much as possible reseed itself, because the wind can carry some of these seeds. Like mistflower seeds, they're great in the wind, right? They get carried off to the next yard. And I am all for your native plants reseeding themselves into other people's yards. You know, that may sound like, wait, is that shady? No, that's how Mother Nature is supposed to work. These plants that are native to our area are supposed to be here, and they are the most important things for the wildlife to eat. So we want them to spread if they're a good pollinator plant, if they're a good food source for insects or birds. We want them to spread around, so that's totally fine. Next is, don't clean up an area unless you're prepping to sow seeds or do winter sowing. I know it can be so hard, especially if you're new to gardening. It can be so hard to not clean up your garden in fall and winter, because you're just like, first of all, with winter you feel like there's nothing else to do. I just want to pull the weeds I didn't get to, and I want to like clean up this area, and I want to redo this, and I want to redo that, and I want to open the ground up over here. And I want to keep in mind, when you open the ground up in the spring, weeds are going to pop up right there, okay? So my advice is, don't clean up an area unless you're prepping to sow seeds or do winter sowing. So my current to-do list is to go out in the garden and pull up all my annuals. My annual zinnias, Mexican sunflowers, celosia. I need to pull those out and sow some native plants there. That is a legit task that I have to do soon. And I plan to not pull any of those up until I know for certain what I'm going to plant there and what seeds I'm going to put there. Because I want those seed heads to be up as long as possible. Birds eat zinnia seeds like crazy, and I think they also eat Mexican sunflower seeds. The celosia, I'm not really sure. I don't think I've caught them eating the celosia seeds yet, but it's possible. So those seeds, and I have sunflowers up too. They love the sunflower seeds. So I'm trying to leave them up as long as humanly possible, but once I am ready to sow my native seeds there in that spot, I need to remove all of that to sow those. Okay. But otherwise, I like to leave things as is all winter long. It also looks more beautiful in the snow. If you do get a dusting of snow or even a thicker amount of snow, it looks so much prettier if that snow has something to land on. I mean, if it's just landing on a lawn, It's pretty, I guess, but it's just like all one flat white layer. But if you have all these trees and shrubs and perennials for things to land on, and you've left your stems up, it's a storybook. It is a fairy tale storybook picture, I'm telling you. Okay, so the next thing is winter sowing projects. Obviously, if you are a wildlife gardener, a native plant gardener, this is probably going to be your number one task in the winter, is to do winter sowing projects. You can do winter sowing in milk jugs. You can do winter sowing in pots. You can do winter sowing in the ground. You can do winter sowing in lasagna containers with lids. If you don't know how to do winter sowing, go on YouTube and just search winter sowing. This will give you an idea of how this works. There are so many different videos online how to do it. There's so many tips and tricks on blogs on Google. Like, you can just Google this. If you want me to do a video on my winter sowing, leave a comment down below, because I do plan to do some winter sowing this year. I plan to do at least 2 different methods this year. Last year I had a propagation bed that I did, so that's another thing you could do. You can make a little temporary raised bed and put some soil in it and, like, winter sow that way. Put a window screen over it, like make a little window screen frame, and just put that over it to keep the squirrels from getting your seeds and birds. Okay, so we covered winter sowing. The next thing is, don't forget stratification. That's why we do the winter sowing. Winter sowing gives us the opportunity to put our seeds outside, let them do their thing naturally that they would do in a wild area, because Mother Nature knows what she's doing. The seeds have certain things that make them germinate. Different species have different ways of germinating. So some things need stratification when it comes to cold and warm. Some things need stratification when it comes to wet and dry. Some things need a mix of all of that. Some things need more than, like, winter to stratify. Some things won't germinate for like a full year or 2. So keep that in mind. Every species is going to be a little bit different. So you want to look up the species that you're planting, and you want to look up specifically how they germinate and what their stratification requirements are. And, by the way, some grasses that are native, if they're warm season grasses, they might not need to stratify at all. But it depends on the grass, so look it up, okay? So some things you're going to probably want to plant in fall and winter, and some things you're probably going to want to sow in spring. But a lot of the things that I personally plant need to be planted in winter. Specifically January-ish, maybe late December. So we're getting close for me to time to think about winter sowing and prepping for it. Okay, I think that this next tip is one of my favorite ideas, and that is to take the winter to look back at your own garden journals, because you might have notes that you've created or tips for yourself in there. So first of all, I just want to say, if you're not keeping a garden journal, you really should. You really, really, really should. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be anything special. Just grab a notebook from Dollar Tree or something and start writing the date down and write about your garden, okay? Just, that's how you get started. It's super simple, and it is so rewarding. Plus, we can't remember every single thing about our garden. I know we think we can, but we really, really can't. We really, really can't. So we've got to record. I want you to record the plants that are thriving, the plants that are not doing well at all, the plants that are dying. I want you to record what you sowed, when you sowed it. I want you to record the areas of your garden. I want you to name each area of your garden if you have, more than a tiny, tiny garden. I want you to name each section of your garden. I want you to record all that in your garden journal. Even if you can't really draw, just draw bubbles to represent each garden bed. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just draw shapes. basic shapes. I want you to talk in your garden journal about what you want for your garden. Are you a fall garden kind of person? Do you love fall color? I do. I love fall color. Do you love wildlife? I love wildlife. So there's some overlap you can do there. Look at host plants for butterflies. That way you can help the wildlife. But what host plants that you can get for butterflies that would do well in your garden also have beautiful fall color? Look at the overlap, because if you're like me and you have a semi-small garden, you kind of need things to have multiple functions. You might need something that blooms in the spring and brings in the early pollinators, but it also has pretty fall color, but it's also a host plant for a butterfly. You know what I mean? You might want your plants to each have like 2 or 3 functions at least if you have a small space. Because the smaller the space, the less room you have to plant as diverse of plants. So multiple functions for each plant is a great way to take care of that. But yeah, garden journaling. I highly, highly recommend it. Wintertime is a great time to look back at your garden journal and to write in your garden journal. You know, like I said, write what you've actually done when it comes to winter sowing. Write it down in your garden journal. Write down what plants you want for next year. What do you want to plant in the spring? What do you want to plant in the fall? Write it down. Okay, the next tip is another really, really fun one for winter, and it's to cozy up on the couch, throw as many blankets on yourself as you can if you're cold, drink your coffee, your tea, whatever warm drink you want, your hot cocoa, and read gardening books, and watch gardening videos, and read gardening articles, okay? Highly, highly recommend this in the wintertime. Read those gardening books. Get inspired for the rest of the year. Like, use wintertime as a time to cozy up and read a gardening book and learn more about wildlife gardening, wild gardening, native plant gardening. Okay? Highly recommend it. And also watch some garden videos, because sometimes we just need a little boost to our mood, and nothing boosts your mood more if you love to garden than watching someone in a garden video from like spring or summertime in the wintertime. So you are currently sitting in your house and outside it's cold and it's winter, but you have the power to see a garden in spring and summer on your screen right now if you have YouTube, if you have the internet. So take advantage of that. The next thing is to join a garden group or a Wild Ones group near you. So wintertime is that time of year where volunteer groups really, really lose a little bit of activity in their group. They lose a little bit of membership in their group. And, you know, we're kind of stuck inside and there's not as much to do in the garden. And we're kind of like, maybe our mood's low. And it can be good to, you know, either start your own group or join a group and talk to people about gardening. And it can kind of keep your inspiration going, because sometimes wintertime can just kind of sink our mood and it can kind of sink our inspiration to the bottom of the ocean. So in order to keep our inspiration flow going, it can be a great idea to join a garden group, okay? I know it sounds strange because it's like, who joins a garden group in December? But like, that's when they need you the most. That's when they need your volunteer work the most and your commitment the most, because it's December's the end of the year and they've got to wrap up their end of the year stuff, and they need to know, like, boom, 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 do we have people who can commit to the next year's work? So that can be something you can do and get going in winter. The next thing, and I think it's my last thing on my list, is maybe start your own garden blog or YouTube channel using photos and videos of your own garden in all 4 seasons. So in addition to having a garden journal, I highly recommend that you take lots of photos of your garden, document your garden, take videos of your garden, because you're going to look back. If you've planted a tree, you're going to love to see that tree grow over time. You're going to love to go back and see, oh my gosh, I planted that and it was only like 2 feet tall. Or, oh my gosh, I planted that and it was only an acorn or a seed of some kind. I planted that in the ground and now it's like 20 foot tall. Oh my gosh. Isn't that satisfying? I think it's satisfying to see every stage of a tree grow, every stage of a shrub grow, and to see like what it can become when you've nurtured it, you've watered it, you've planted it, you've mulched around it, you've planted stuff around it, and just to watch that process. So I hope this video was helpful for you guys, and I hope it can kind of help mitigate a little bit of the wintertime blues. You know, depending on where you live, this can be easier or more difficult to mitigate, right? So just try to focus on the things that you can control and focus on the things that you can enjoy in the winter, and just give yourself a little bit of rest. I mean, that's one great thing about the winter time, isn't it? You know, you don't have nearly as much hard labor that you need to do in your garden, if any at all, and you can relax a little bit, which we all need. You know, I mean, especially if you've been working hard in the spring and summer, and the heat of the summer just gets worse and worse. So try to remember that in the cold and dead of winter. Just remember how hot summer was and how happy you are that you're not like sweating bullets, okay? Just try to remember that, because I'm not a heat person, so winter can definitely be a welcome thing. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will talk to you soon. See you next time. Bye, guys. To support the channel, like the video, comment, and subscribe. You can also support my work by buying art from me at macylu.com. Thanks for watching!